tonight. Well, not the whole book, just the first chapter. So if you don't have your Bibles over there, be turned over and we'll start talking about chapter 1 and how that kind of fits into the narrative that we've been studying on the history of God's people in the Old Testament. Before we do that, though, we'll deal with question number 1, kind of the think about it question, or kind of introduces one of the main subjects that we'll be looking at tonight. And that question is simply this: are there any benefits that come along with power and prestige? And we might even add riches, wealth to that too. Are there any benefits that come along with those?
Lots of worldly benefits for sure.
Okay. What would you say some of the worldly benefits would be?
You can always use money.
Okay. The more money and wealth that you have, the more access you have to resources, right? So that is kind of an advantage in the world that we live in today. What else would come to mind about power and prestige? Is there any advantage in having those?
They provide opportunities for you.
Okay. They provide opportunities, and what kind of opportunities?
For more power and prestige.
Yeah, that's generally the road it leads down, isn't it? Influence. Yeah, that's kind of what I was thinking about. Generally, those who have, either fame or power, they have a higher social influence than, the normal Joe that would live in everyday society. Why is that?
They're perceived to be smarter. Perceived.
Yeah, they're perceived as being higher up, aren't they? And so people look at them, and they have more respect for them. They have greater admiration for them than they would for other people. So there are some definite advantages or benefits that come along with those things. Are there any drawbacks? Okay. The more you're in the eye of the public, I would say, wouldn't you? The greater chance there is for displeasing people, maybe. Anything else? Yeah. Generally, when you look back at a lot of these kings that we're studying here, not just Israel's kings, but these kings of the other empires, what was their downfall? It was their pride, wasn't it?
Usually they did all the work and accomplished everything by themselves.
Yeah, that was their perception, right? Look at what I did, and look at what belongs to me. And sometimes people get in those positions where they attain great wealth, or they have great fame, and they think, well, I did this all by myself. But there's a lot of people usually behind the scenes who help contribute that. And of course, along with that pride comes, I guess it goes hand in hand, but really an overestimation of self-worth. How important they are and how much they're worth. Some of the same things, though, that we talked about, I think that can be a benefit in those positions can also be a drawback. I think there's a greater opportunity to be tempted because you do have access to so many resources. A lot more opportunities probably that could come our way. Yeah, he's a great example, right? He was a wise guy, too. He wasn't lacking in wisdom. He understood a lot of things, but man, when you start talking about the money that he had and the influence and the way that people adored him, he fell into that trap, didn't he? A lot of these people end up, too, really because they overestimate their self-worth and undervalue other people. They almost step into a world of tyranny, don't they? Where they're going to tell everybody what to do and keep everything in order, and if people don't like it, then they can either get out of the way or they'll be dead. But a lot of these kings go down that road. Tonight we're going to talk about King Ahasuerus. We'll talk about his name a little bit more here in a few moments. But this is a pretty important king because really the majority of the book of Ezra deals with what happened under his reign. Now, we studied the first part of it because that didn't really happen under his reign, but we'll go back to the book of Ezra here and after we finish up with Esther and talk some more about it. And also the book of Nehemiah. The book of Nehemiah happened under his reign too. But let's start out question number 2 here. So you get the book of Esther. What is the background that's kind of given behind the story to the book of Esther? We obviously know a few things. Who is in power? Persians, right? They're still ruling over the world. They're still kind of the world empire at this time. And the book kind of opens into a look into the palace of King Ahasuerus. Now, a couple of things that are probably worth noting. Ahasuerus is not his Persian name. Okay, I'm not even going to try to pronounce his Persian name, but he had a Persian name. And a lot of times what happens is when you take names from one language to another, they get changed in some form. I was kind of thinking about, before Josh was born, I was able to take a missionary trip to Japan. And the people that were kind of preparing me for it, they told me, now, when you introduce yourself to somebody, they said, don't say my name's Clint. They said, your name is Clinto Yarberson. So I was like, okay, whatever. But there's kind of a difference when you go from language to language, how the name changes a little bit. And that's true in any language. Some are pretty major changes, some are not so major changes. But Ahasuerus was actually what the Jews called this particular king. And what did the Greeks call it? Does anybody know? Well, if you're looking at him from a Grecian perspective, it would be the name Xerxes. Xerxes the first is what we're talking about. So when you're talking about Xerxes and you're talking about Ahasuerus, now you're talking about basically the same people. There were some other people who, it's kind of like the title Pharaoh. A lot of people think there were others who were named Ahasuerus. It was kind of a title to be. And that could be. But as we're reading about King Ahasuerus here, that's who we're reading about. If you want to study him, go study Xerxes, and, from the Grecian standpoint, and it'll kind of give you an idea. So, not something that you have to know, but beneficial to know whenever you're studying history. Now, does anybody know who was his father? Just got done studying about him. That helps. Yeah, Darius was his father. His grandfather was Cyrus. Remember, Cyrus was the one who gave the decree for the Jews to go back and rebuild the temple. So he comes from, royal stock. In fact, he's pretty well trained to take over this position. But we get a glimpse into his palace and really some things that are happening behind the scene here. You're reading about it. We begin in chapter 1. We start reading about a banquet. And who is in attendance? Question number 3 here. Who is it that is attending this banquet that the king is putting on?
Princes and servants.
Okay. So you have your royalty, right? Anybody who is of royal lineage is going to be there. What other important figures are there? Yeah, you got all your top military brass. They're going to be in attendance at this feast too. Anybody else stand out? It's just basically all the important people within the kingdom of Persia. And so that's kind of the people that have been invited to this banquet. Now, before the actual banquet itself takes place, question number 4, there are some events that precede that banquet. What are the events that precede or that lead up to this great feast that he's going to throw? Yeah, and how long did that show last? 180 days, right? You do that math, that's roughly 6 months. 6 months or 180 days, he basically puts on this public display of how powerful he is, how wealthy he is, and all the vast resources that he has at his disposal. Now, it's not likely that all these people were present there for that 6-month period, because to pull all the top military people out of their positions for 6 months, you're kind of putting yourself at risk, aren't you? But I imagine there was a rotation where these important people would come in and they would kind of spend some time with the king, and then they would go and another group would come in. And it was all leading up to this 7-day feast or banquet that was going to take place. Now, does anybody, this isn't in the Bible, you won't find it anywhere, but it is kind of interesting from a historical perspective. Now, does anybody know why he was throwing this feast? Or why he put on this display of power for 6 months? What was his motive?
He was planning to invade Greece.
Yeah, he wanted to make a mass invasion of Europe and Greece, didn't he? That was his goal, and he had to get everybody on board. And so what do? You invite them in, you woo them, you show them how great you are, and you try to convince them that this is a good idea, and they get on board with it. Now, you won't find that in the book of Esther, because the Bible account isn't really concerned about all the history that's going on behind the scenes. It's just telling us the story of how Esther comes to be queen of Persia, and how she's able to influence and deliver the Jews here. But it is kind of interesting to know that in the background. His father, Darius, that had been one of his dreams or conquests, was to conquer Greece. And he actually went in, and he did a pretty good job until the reinforcements came, and then they were able to drive him out. And Darius, he decided he was going to go back and try it again, but he died before he could ever fulfill that. And so now his son is basically, you might say it was his father's dying wish, but he says, I can do honor and justice of my father, and I can expand my kingdom at the same time, but I got to get everybody on board with it. And so this is the way that he's trying to win these people over and to get their approval in order to go and to attack Greece. So you read about the setting of this banquet. Question number 5, how are the scenes around this banquet and even before it, this display that he puts on, how are they described? What are some of the things that stand out to you when you read about it?
Would they occur in the garden or I guess it would be considered a courtyard, maybe?
Yeah, it would have been a very, very luxurious garden that he was showing off. And when you read about the things that he put on display there, of course, you read about, all the curtains that have been strung along, and they're woven out of the finest blue and white threads of that day and age. And then they're tied in ribbons of purple, fancy material, and actually fastened into sockets of silver. And they're put on marble pillars. And so you can imagine, you walk in and you say, man, this is amazing. What kind of seats did he have? Gold and silver seats. Could you imagine? Couches and all the chairs that people sit in or recline upon had gold and silver, within. They probably weren't all gold and silver. I don't think that'd be too comfortable, but they certainly had enough that when you looked at it, you noticed it, and it was impressive in nature. And what's kind of the final thing that you read about there? Yeah, well, yeah, that is the final one. You're right. I was thinking about the pavement, though. The pavement into the courtyard, he actually took some of the rarest and most expensive jewels within the kingdom, very vibrant in color, and they laid them down and made pavement out of them. And so the last thing that was mentioned there that Glenn rightfully brought up was the golden goblets that he had made, for everybody who was going to be present, and they were all unique in design. They weren't all the same, but they were all unique for every individual who would drink out of that goblet. And so you can imagine this is an extravagant show that he's putting on here to kind of woo the people and, again, win them over into thinking, how great of a person he is and how powerful he is and how many resources that he has at his disposal. But what you read about, that happens for 6 months, and then finally the banquet or the feast comes, a 7-day feast that he puts on where everybody comes at this particular time. And you read about as that feast progressive, what does the king do on the 7th day of the banquet? Yeah, he decides that he's going to summon the queen. And why would he summon the queen? Now, the Bible tells us, the women, they had their own banquet going on somewhere else. They weren't involved in all the men were doing here. But why was he going to summon the queen? More show, right? The Bible says she's a very beautiful woman. And so once again, you want to impress people. What do? Well, you show off what you got. And he thought, I can bring Vashti in here and I can show her off, and the people are going to say, man, what a beautiful wife this guy has. But it's a couple of things that come to mind. As you think about what type of person Ahasuerus was, it's a pretty dark individual. You read about these feasts. In fact, you'll read about all kinds of banquets that happen in the book of Esther. It's a pretty common thing for these feasts to be put on. And really, were they more of a feast or just a drunken party?
Probably the drunken.
Yeah. What were the king's orders here when it came to this feast? Did you catch that?
Royal wines and buttons.
Yeah. Yeah, you drink as much as you want. King's orders, right? And so, what do you think the mindset of these guys was by day 7? Probably not very stable, right?
What's interesting there in verse 8, it says that they weren't required to drink.
Yeah,
So if somebody didn't want to drink, they didn't have to.
yeah, yeah. I doubt there were very many people like that there, though. But we do know this: the king was all about drinking, wasn't he? He certainly had his fill, and I think that kind of plays into what he does too. Obviously, when people are intoxicated, they do some things that if they were in their normal mindset, they usually wouldn't do. And so he decides, I'm going to put my wife on display for everybody to see. I'm going to impress everybody by her beauty. And so he decides that he's going to summon her in. A couple of things that are kind of interesting about Ahasuerus. He had a lot of control, but one thing that he didn't have control over was his own fleshly desires. And how many people can you say that about in the world today? When it comes to our fleshly desires, that's something that has to be intact. Think about the verse in Proverbs where it talks about a man who doesn't have his spirit under control is like a city that's walls are broken down. Things are going to get to him and things are going to come out of him that normally wouldn't. But that's kind of a picture of Ahasuerus here. I was kind of thinking about this too. Of course, in our society, alcoholism is certainly a lucrative business. And generally, when lots of commercials, lots of advertising that exist around that industry today. But generally, when you see maybe a paper advertisement or even a commercial, what kind of depiction is put forth around drinking?
Happy.
Yeah, happy, and I would also say this: don't you think successful is one of those things that's kind of put forth? You have these athletes out here running around, doing these amazing things, and if you drink, you're going to be successful. That's kind of the idea a person would get if they were just watching it objectively. But if you really stopped and you made a commercial about drinking and how it affects human behavior in society, what kind of commercial do you think it would be?
Should be sad.
Yeah. Do what, Dennis?
No, I wasn't general a lot was.
Yeah. I think you'd have broken marriages. I mean, you'd have mental and physical harm, bodily harm that has been committed to people. You know, all kinds of things that come to mind, but not success. And of course, one of the things that was taught to Lemuel in the book of Proverbs, remember his mother taught him Proverbs chapter 31, verse 4. Kings should not drink. Stay away from intoxicating alcohol, right? Why is that especially important for a king, do you think?
That's his big thing.
Yeah, because he has so much power and control and influence, right? And you could wind up in a situation where you make some pretty ignorant and bad decisions. And I think that's kind of what Ahasuerus did. So, question number 7 here, we kind of dealt with that. Why did the king want Queen Vashti to leave her banquet to come to him? Well, he wanted to show her off. And think about this too. Just kind of shows you how the character of this guy in front of a bunch of drunken men. I mean, do you think that's a pretty good environment to show off a woman's beauty? No. But it kind of, I think it reflects upon King Ahasuerus. It kind of tells you what he thought of women, and even his own wife, what he thought about her. To him, she was just another piece of property, and for him to do whatever he wanted with her to benefit himself. And that's kind of a pretty common idea in a lot of societies today. But some people even think that, you read about her wearing her royal crown there. Some people think about he was asking her just to come out with a royal crown only. That could be a possibility. I did find an interesting tidbit of information. I was kind of reading the background behind some of this, and I came across somebody who made the statement that she would have been pregnant at this time with one of the children. I spent too many hours trying to verify that. I never could verify it, so I'm not comfortable in saying that's a fact. But that was, a suggestion that somebody offered, and if that be the case, you might kind of understand it a little bit more too. But he had no respect for women. He didn't even have any respect for his own wife. So question number 8 here: how does Queen Vashti respond to the king's command? She refused. Now, there's several things that are working against her by refusing this. First of all, she's a woman who's refusing the orders, or basically assuming a position over a man in that day and in that society. Not a good situation to be in right then. The second one that was kind of against her, it was a wife who was telling her husband no. Again, that day in that society, you would not last very long. And then the third one, and to me, this is really the most important one. She was a citizen of the kingdom of Persia who was telling the king no. And so that put her in a pretty difficult situation.
She also did involve powerful friends.
Yeah. But remember this too. This background is important. What is Xerxes trying to do here? What's the purpose of all this?
Show he's in command.
Trying to impress everybody, isn't it? And if you tell your wife to do something and she doesn't do it, I mean, if you can't even command and control your own wife, they're going to say, how can he command and control a whole army, It's going to make him look bad, isn't it? Go ahead, Daryl.
Well, typically if you refuse something the king asked you to do, the penalty was death.
Yeah.
But I don't see anywhere that she was put to death.
No, and that just kind of indicates to me she must have been a pretty important person. Because like you said, normally a king wouldn't have thought twice and would just have him put to death. But that's not the case in this particular story. So question 9 here, how does King Ahasuerus react to Vashti's disobedience? He said, no big deal, right? It happens every day at home. The Bible says he was furious. What? And there's a couple of things that are leading up to what's going to happen here. The first one is intoxication. The second one is anger. When you mix those two things together, anybody ever seen an angry, intoxicated person? It's not a good situation, is it? But that's kind of the situation that he is. Those two forces, anger and intoxication, those two powerful forces have probably done more destruction to this world and societies than statistics could ever reflect. But he charges her with insubordination. She's disobeyed the king's orders. And so question 10 here, who does the king consult with to decide what to do about the queen's disobedience?
Wise men.
Yeah, he had 7 men who advised him in what we would call matters of the state. These guys were probably, generally they were what were known as diviners or astrologers. Those were kind of the higher ups, but they were the advisors to the king. And so he knew that something had to be done, and obviously Vashti had embarrassed him in front of all these key pieces and leaders of the Persian Empire. And so he had to do something to rescue his ego and his reputation. And that he didn't know what, though. He didn't know what was best. Like Darrell said, usually person would be put to death, but it seems to me that if he'd done that, there would have been a lot of backlash. And so he knows something has to be done, but he's not exactly sure what needs to be done. And so question 11, what advice do these wise men end up giving to Xerxes?
Basically, find a replacement.
Yeah, dethrone her. She's not going to be queen anymore. And she can never come into the presence of the king again. And then you need to find somebody who will replace her, right? And how did they word her replacement? You notice how they describe the one who should replace her?
Royal position.
Yeah. New King James Version, this is, if I can find the number here, verse 19. The last part of verse 19 says, let the king give her royal position to another who is better than she. In other words, somebody who's going to be obedient, right? That's what they really meant. Somebody who's better than she is. Somebody who, when the king tells them to do something, they're going to go ahead and do it. And so that was the advice that the wise men give to the king. Now, we're given some information kind of behind the scenes here, and these guys were really, these guys in these key positions in these empires, they were really influential over the kings. But when you read about what was really going through the minds of these wise men, what fear, question 12 here, did they have that this behavior of Queen Vashti was going to have within the empire of the kingdom? What were they really afraid about?
It'll make them worry about their lives.
Yeah. So they kind of, probably every guy in that room probably had the same problem the king did, I would say. We still have it today, right? Nothing's changed. But they kind of over-exaggerated the problem, and what they ended up coming to the conclusion was that she didn't just dishonor the king, she's actually tried to uproot the entire kingdom or empire, by putting women in positions of leadership or, telling the men no, or they can't do this, or they have to do that. And of course, their reasoning was this: if you allow her to just go on, she's defied the orders of the king. That's the highest ranking you could have in the empire. And so, what's going to happen to every other relationship in the empire? Well, all the women are going to be emboldened, and they're going to take the same stance that Vashti did. And so they had to do something. That's really what they were scared about, the Bible says. They had to do something to try to head that off. Question 13 here. So what impact did the wise men want the king's decree to have in the kingdom? What did they hope to accomplish by this?
All wives have to be submissive to papers, no.
Yeah, basically they thought we can command women to have more honor and respect for males. That's what we can accomplish by removing Vashti and making this royal decree throughout the kingdom. But you think about, I was kind of thinking about the principle of authority within the family or the home. And obviously, when you study the Bible, there is a chain of authority, right? But how do you establish, how is the husband or the male supposed to establish honor and respect within the family relationship? By commanding?
Kindness.
Yeah, by example, right? And, if we live like God tells us to do, then there's going to be mutual honor and respect for one another. But can you command honor and respect? I mean, you can, right? You can make a commandment, but that's not generally going to generate true honor and true respect in the mind and the heart of an individual.
I think what force or command is obedience.
Yeah.
But respect, you can't control that.
No. People can obey and still not respect you, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. And, that's kind of, think about that if that's the way that God told us to rule within our homes. We as males, we say, well, we're in charge. If you don't do what I tell you to do, you're going to get kicked to the curb. That wouldn't be a very good relationship, would it? Not going to be a very good relationship between two individuals. But they thought, we can do this. We can make this decree, and it's going to smooth out everything within the empire. Question 14, so what did the king decide to do about Vashti? Exactly what the wise men told him, right? And ultimately, of course, he wanted revenge. That's what he was after. He wanted to save face. So he was going to be for whatever helped him do that. And they brought up this suggestion. It sounded good to him, and he took their advice and acted on it. Here's a thought, question 15. How do you think Vashti's actions affected all the women in the kingdom? You think it had an effect on their lives in the kingdom of Persia? Yeah, I know this. Couldn't have helped them any, could it? Sometimes we ask the question, can the actions of one person really have an effect on the entire world? The answer is yes, right? If you study the Bible, did Adam and Eve's actions have an effect on the entire world? Did the actions of Jesus on the cross have an effect? Yeah. And so the fact that she stood up and did what was right, though, that's the thing about it. It actually caused a lot of turmoil within the kingdom itself. Go ahead, Daryl. You got another comment?
Yeah. I get the idea that the normal situation was that men were head of the household.
Yeah.
And this queen, by disobeying, was in danger of that not continuing.
Yeah.
But the king's decree just reinforced what they were already doing anyway.
Right. Yeah. And it's also important to point out, if anybody was thinking about rebelling, they'd probably put it to the end, don't you think? There had to be something happen to her. There had to be some kind of consequences in order for it to have an effect. So think about this, question 16. What are some consequences a person can experience for standing up for what is right?
Look down upon.
Yeah, what did it do to Vashti?
You get to no longer be queen.
Yeah, basically ruined her life, didn't it? Yeah. That's one of the principles I don't think we probably talk about enough, but generally those who are in positions of power, wisdom doesn't come along with that position of power. And you know what happens to the nail that raises its head? You go through nailing the board and you hit over here and you look back and there's one that popped up. You know what happens to that nail? Yeah, it gets hit in the head, doesn't it? And that's kind of Vashti here. She was in a dangerous situation. And that's really the reality of living in a world where people hold that kind of power. You do what's right, you can get in a pretty difficult situation, dangerous situation sometimes. And we have to be aware of that. That's the reality of it, but we also have to be spiritually acute to the idea that there's a lot more important things in this world, this life. Go ahead.
It's kind of like shoes on the other foot, though, for the king, though. He would have done the right thing. And all the powerful men would have been against him.
Yeah.
He was getting goaded by them to make sure that everything went across, too, whether he was mad or not, yes.
Yeah, it wasn't about what was right and wrong. It was just about getting what he wanted to get. Yeah, good point.
But it was Anthony, she said for us,
Yeah, that's the real question, isn't it? That's the most important question. Of course, God's assessment of her and the king's and the empire's assessment would have been the difference between night and day. But good ideas, good thoughts. Appreciate the comments. Lord willing, next week we'll pick up. I think we've got chapters 2 and 3 to look at.